everyone. Welcome to this special on-demand webinar. My name is Cassie. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at PETA, and I am so glad we can bring this author conversation to you. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. We live on the lands of the oldest living culture on Earth, one with a long and rich history of storytelling, and it's just such a great privilege to read and write and talk about stories here, where it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today's guest has graciously joined us at, I guess, nighttime in the US, and I am very grateful for it. The great Rob Harrell is the author and illustrator of the highly praised graphic novel Monster on the Hill, which has been adapted into an animated film called Rumble and is coming very soon, and the illustrated book series The Life of Zarf. His fifth book, the very popular Wink, which I'm just going to hold up right here, is a fictional story drawn from his own experiences. And his latest graphic novel, Batpig, When Pigs Fly, which I just finished reading, is inspired by the illustrations from Wink. Welcome, Rob. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. This is very cool. I'm glad we can do this over Zoom.
Me too. Can you tell us how you started writing and creating for children and young people, and what drew you towards this kind of storytelling?
I started writing and drawing when I was in about fourth grade. It was when I got sort of the bug and started focusing. At that point, comic strips were my favorite thing. So I would read comic strips like Calvin and Hobbes and, well, it wasn't around yet, but, the Peanuts, Garfield, all that. And I just fell in love with it and told my parents in fourth grade that I wanted to do a comic strip when I grew up. So I was always the guy who drew growing up. And then I eventually got out of school and became an illustrator. But the whole time I was focused on trying to become a cartoonist. And I finally did. And so I wrote for years. I had a comic strip for years called Big Top. And then about 11 years ago, I took over an existing strip called Adam at Home. And so I still do that. And so those were daily strips. So I got very good at writing as edgy as I could, but in a family setting, if that makes sense. It was, I sort of honed my skills at being funny in that arena. And it was sort of a natural thing that happened when I started writing, that I wrote for all ages, I think, just because I'd always been doing the comic strips. That said, I also really wanted to write for this age group just because I think it's such a fun, crazy time, like middle school. You're sort of crawling out from under your parents' influence and learning to be yourself a little bit. And, even minor things have great weight to you. Certain slights or achievements that happen seem even bigger in that time period, it seems to me. And I also, I think, I had my best friend Lance. He was my first friend that my parents didn't like in seventh grade, and there was something just magical about that. Like, oh my gosh, they think he's dangerous, or not dangerous, but they just thought they weren't sure about him. They were a little unsure. So there was something really cool about that. And so I think it's a fun time to write about as kids become people. Not that they're not people before, but I just mean they develop a little bit more of their own sense of self.
I love that. It is really such a pivotal kind of moment, isn't it, when you kind of become more of who you are?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think so much is packed into those few years. You probably develop who you are more in those 3 years than you do in, any other 15 years in your life.
Yeah, and that gives you so much to write about as well.
It does.
When you were in those years, that which we've just established are really kind of critical years, what were you reading? Just comic strips? Were you reading books? What did you look for on the shelf when you were picking what would be next?
I was reading a lot of comic strips. And then I would go to the store and collect all these cartoon books that came out. But I also, I was never a big reader, and my older sister was, and my parents wished I was a bigger reader. And I think it was in fourth or fifth grade that I got a hold of a Mad magazine. And that's kind of all I wanted to read. I don't know if you guys had Mad magazine over there, but yeah, I just worshiped those guys in Mad magazine. And anyway, they got me into reading, and eventually it caught fire. It was sort of like the spark that caught fire, and then I just couldn't get my hands. Then I started reading Encyclopedia Brown and the John Bellairs novels, like House with the Clock in Its Walls, and they were just so many. And Narnia books and all that, and then pretty quickly I moved on to reading adult books. I think I picked up Jaws when I was way too young to read Jaws, but that sort of did a new thing for me, where suddenly I was reading stuff that felt could kind of take your breath away and that sort of thing. So I didn't steer away from the heavy stuff when I got into high school and on.
Do you read different things now? Do you read more now, or do you read less now that you're creating stuff?
I read more now when I can. Like, I just took a vacation and I read 3 books while I was on vacation because I was so excited to have the time. And I read a wide variety of stuff. I've got my, detective novels that I'm a junkie for. But then I also, while I was up there, I read the new Stephen King. I read a book by Lee Bardugo called Ninth House, which is sort of adult. It feels like an adult Harry Potter. It's like Harry Potter mixed with the girl with the dragon tattoo or something is how I would kind of describe it. So I kind of read all over the map, just whatever catches my interest. And then I've been reading a lot more middle grade just to be aware of what's out there and see what sparks makes me want to go sit down and write again.
I love that it seems like the really common thread through all the things that you're reading now, and it's really reflected in what you're writing about, even though on the surface they seem really different, is these like big stakes that are drawn from emotional events. Like you've got detective novels, which are usually sparked from some kind of crime that is some sort of like, mental or emotional thing, right? And you've got these big fantasy stories that are often so much about how we feel. And then these middle grade novels and graphic novels are so much about like how you feel becoming bigger than yourself and often turning into monsters and that kind of thing. So it's fascinating.
I think that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I like that.
You can feel free to steal that and use that somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down here.
I wanted to ask you about being someone who draws and illustrates as well as writes, and obviously how that can combine into creating comic strips and graphic novels and these stories that use a multitude of forms. What is it about visual stories that you liked so much when you found them and that you like creating?
I think, I love art. I love writing. I think something magical happens when they come together in the right way. If you use them together the right way and you don't lean too heavily on one or the other, and they sort of mingle, they become something else. And I find that really, really interesting. I mean, that's not to say, I think when I started out, I saw myself as an illustrator or an artist. And eventually over time started feeling like I was a writer or an artist who could kind of write. And over the last couple of books, that started to shift a little bit to where I almost feel more confident with my writing than I do with the artwork. But I think when I'm best is when I'm combining the two. Although I don't know, in Wink, I really enjoyed stretching out and just using prose, but it's been really fun working on these new Batpig books that I have coming out. It's a full graphic novel, and it's just it's a lot of work, but it's really rewarding to see those characters spring to life. And I love the sketching process because you're seeing it kind of forming, and then you ink it and it's more refined and you can see what it's going to look like, and then you put the color in and it all comes to life. And so there's so many stages to it, and it's almost like sculpting. I think by the time you get done, writing the words and doing the art and all that, you've created something very three-dimensional in my head, and hopefully it feels that way to other people.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. And you can kind of tell because the stories just absolutely just jump off the page, which is me jumping, I suppose. But it makes it really exciting and dynamic, I think.
Well, and I love reading graphic novels, and I love reading. I have some friends that are doing middle grade graphic novels and things like, and you get so much of their personality when you put the artwork and the writing. It's something, especially if one person is doing both. I feel like you get this thing that no one else could create. So you get this very unique experience.
Yeah, and it becomes kind of a whole world, which is just in itself, which is really exciting.
Yeah, yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do too.
Thank goodness. How do you decide whether the story you want to tell should be a graphic novel or a comic strip? Like, how do you work that out? Do you have the idea first and then you find the medium for it? Or do you kind of go, now I want to do a graphic novel and find a story that suits it? How does that happen in your brain?
Um, each book is just sort of bubbled up in its own weird way. Like I had this horrible job where I was filming the Texas school board here, which was just soul crushing. I was sitting in this little room in the back with, filming, moving the cameras, and I got really bored, and I would sit back there and draw monsters and birds and things like that, and just make them up out of my head because I was sort of stuck back in the dark back there, and I started drawing these characters, and suddenly they felt like something I wanted to expand a story around. So that's how Monster on the Hill started. Then, but like with Wink, I went through a whole bunch of different ways of thinking about telling that story. At one point, because it really came from, I had a cancer experience 15 years ago, and I wanted to tell that story. And at first I thought about an adult memoir, then I thought about a graphic novel. I thought about doing a book that was just a series of comic strips using my first characters from my first comic strip. And then a friend of mine's daughter found out she had cancer, and she and I talked a lot, and suddenly I saw this idea for it as a middle grade book, sort of combining our experiences. And yeah. And then I so that one just sort of evolved too. So far, and then Batpig sort of sprang out of that, and I just couldn't imagine doing Batpig any other way than just a full graphic novel. So you got the color and the action and all that.
It's so fascinating to hear about, how these ideas come to life. I love it. So thank you for that. What is the process like when you are creating a new story? Is it different for a graphic novel than writing a novel? Do you work differently? Do you make it a different process?
Yeah, I do work differently. When I wrote Wink, I sat down at a computer and wrote it. I just typed it, and that's something I'd never done before. So it felt very new. Because when I write the graphic novels or the comic strip, I'm always working. Well, I guess I had done it on Life of Zarf. It's just I sort of combined the two that time, and I was doing cartoons while I was writing, but normally I sit and I sketch very, very loosely, and just write the thing out and as I'm going. So it's just like I start doing a really rough comic page, and that's how I write it. So that one takes a little bit longer. I don't know. They're sort of equal, because then once I write the whole story, then I rewrite it 1,000 times. I'm not a great writer. I'm a better rewriter. I stole that from someone. I don't remember who, but that's me. So yeah, that process then. And then with Wink, originally I had way more illustrations in it, and I did the illustrations, and I think I had 3 times as many illustrations, and I pulled it back. And part of that was with Wink, because it was about such a heavy topic. I wanted to make sure I got the humor just right, and had the tone just right. And eventually I started thinking some of the jokes seemed a little too jokey, and I didn't want anybody to think I was being flippant about the subject matter. So I pulled a bunch of those out. So there's all this give and take that happens either way.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about being a better sort of rewriter than a writer. Does that feel like sculpting, like the process of creating the art and building it out? Does it give you that same brain feeling?
It does, I think, because I wouldn't want anybody to see the first draft I did of Wink. I really wouldn't. And I know there are writers out there who are who sit by themselves and write the whole book, and then they don't want anybody to touch a word of it. And I am not one of those people. I like the sort of working together, the collaboration, talking with my agent, talking with my editor, and we bounce things off of each other, and they're fantastic and they're amazing at giving me ideas like, what if she wasn't real happy with this situation? And it's like, oh my gosh. And then that sends me off on a whole tangent. So I can say that the book got way, way, way better. It just kept getting better each time we reworked it. And to the point now where it's hard to imagine how what I'd started with. So yeah, definitely. You see it come to life in the same way. And you know, you can just go through and change a few sentences in 3 parts of the book, and it changes the tone of the thing. And that's always kind of amazing to me to see how, oh, this has a whole different meaning if you just change a few words here and there. And so I enjoy that part of it.
I love that as the magic of writing, right? That you can just make the landscape entirely different just by tweaking something.
Little tweaks.
Yeah. I also love that you talked about that what if question sparking ideas, because I was listening to an author from over here, Suzanne Gervais, who writes in the same space. She was giving a talk to students, to really young people, and saying, just write what if at the top of your page. Yeah. And see what happens. It seems like this lovely space to just give permission to think about something a little bit differently, because it could just be a thought exercise, but if you like it, you know where that goes, and suddenly it's part of a story. It's such a nice way to keep a story going.
It is, and I'm actually right at that point right now with, I'd want to do a book sort of along the same lines as Wink, but obviously very different. But and so I am at that brainstorming process. I've started about 6 books since Wink, and 6 novels, and then I get 70, 80 pages in and think this is not going the way I want it to go. And so yeah, I'm still and then I go back and brainstorm some more and write what if again.
Are you usually in the middle of several different things, or do you, if you're writing like a major graphic novel or a book, is that the only thing you're writing?
Well, other than my daily strip. So I still do my 7 days a week work on the strip. And so I generally am, racing out ahead on that to get ahead by a few weeks. So then I can work on the book for a few weeks. And then my deadline catches up with me again, and I write some more strips and do those, and then work on a project. And usually I have at least a book and the strip going, and then sometimes I'm working on the next idea and sort of fleshing it out while I'm doing it. So I will say right now, I found out I'm doing a 3rd Batpig book, and it has to be in incredibly quickly. So I'm going to be probably focusing on that for the next while, because it's going to have to happen really quickly. But the writing is going quickly, so I'll just have to get to the artwork, which takes up a lot of the time, but it's really fun. Yeah.
I love that it's all still fun for you.
It is. I mean, there are days, obviously, when you're just not feeling it. But somebody told me a long time ago to, I remember I used to work as a fine artist too, do like paintings. And there would be times when I felt guilty when I was painting that I wasn't working on my comic stuff. And then when I was working on my comic stuff, I felt guilty that I wasn't painting. And this guy encouraged me to follow your energy, which sounds kind of new agey and all that. But if you really just think of it as having enough irons in the fire, so that if one day I'm not feeling like drawing, I can go write. Or if I don't feel like writing, I can go draw or letter or lay out panels or whatever it is. There's always something to hopefully fit my mood.
I love that. I think that's such a nice way to approach because sometimes I think creating feels so big. So to just kind of go, no, this is where I want to be, and I can be. So I will go there.
Today, my brain will allow me to letter, and maybe tomorrow I'll feel more like, brilliant ideas or something, but waiting on that. No.
They'll come. They always do. Yeah. What have you learned about novels, about graphic novels from creating them?
That they were a lot of work. I will say, after Monster on the Hill, I needed a long break because I was pretty new at it I was very new first time. And I underestimated how long it would take. It took way longer than I'm giving myself to do books now. And So it's a lot of work, but I think I also have learned how to, like I talked about, that melding of that's to me is the most important thing. And I've read examples of graphic novels where I think they're too wordy, or I've read one where, or some where it's relies too heavily on the artwork, and I kind of like when they just find that perfect match. So if anything, that's what I've learned. I think is just by trial and error. I figured out how to do that. At least to the point where I like it. I can't say that anybody else would agree, but yeah, that's where I've ended up.
Yeah, I think that idea of trial and error is really important too, of getting something to a place where you feel like you like it by just,
Yeah.
going back and revisiting and reworking, which I know that sometimes is hard for teachers to sell to students. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
But it seems like that, the real gem of the thing is through, just trying it.
Yeah, and I think you know when I was a student or when I was a kid, I think I generally wanted to get my drawings done and get them out to show them to people real fast. And then at some point, when you start working on your own projects, it's you can go the other way where you just want to keep reworking it and keep fixing it and keep fixing it until yeah, you can do that forever. And at some point, you have to be happy with it and get it out the door. So I guess I've learned something too, because that process is quicker for me now. I can I get to a point where I'm happy with it faster, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And talking about letting things out into the world, I'm really interested in hearing about the kind of feedback that you've gotten from young readers about the things that you've created, like Wink, like your graphic novels. Like, what do you hear about? What do people say? What do people say to you? Has there been any kind of response that's really stuck out to you?
Yeah, well, the response that stuck out the most to me is people who've read Wink and have said that it's helped them through a hard time. And I have had kids who've written me who are undergoing cancer treatments, or have a relative who's going through it. I've gotten any number of those kind of letters, and every one of them just proves to me that I did the right thing writing it, which that's why I wanted to write it. That's um, and hopefully it doesn't just help somebody going through a hard time, but also people around someone who's going through a hard time. And so I've gotten a lot of that. And it's been the most rewarding feedback I've ever gotten in my career. Most of my career has been focused more on being funny. And so I get a lot of, people saying that they really like my strip, or really like Life of Zarf. Monster on the Hill is also, I got some pretty personal letters on that one, because it's sort of a thinly veiled, like, self-help book is kind of how I thought of it when I wrote it. There's a bad character in it called the Merc, and I think of that as kind of depression, like the really bad stuff that you got to work through and all that. But it's a book about depression in my mind, and Rayburn is depressed, and I was sort of in a bad spot when I started writing it, and it was sort of a way to get myself out of it. And the fact that that's latched on to people, and I get letters from people who saw that in the book, between the jokes about Pop Tarts and dragons and stuff like that. The fact that people got what I was doing and that it meant something to them. That's the coolest thing ever. That's what you do it for. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that must be so remarkable. And I think about all of these young readers who are so often, looking to find something that rings true to them in the pages of a book, something that they can relate to, or something that reflects their experience, and being able to kind of find that and go, oh, that's me, and then find some kind of hope from that, or some kind of way forward, or even just like feeling like they're not alone is just so powerful.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's magical about reading. I think the fact that someone can go in there and read and find themselves in a book, but then I also still think the flip side of it is that you can live for a while in someone else's shoes, and I think that's the power of story. That I think empathy is sort of we need a lot more of it right now in the world, and I feel like when you meet someone who's a big reader, they generally are a pretty empathetic, sensitive person. And I think part of that is just because you do get to spend that time inside other people's heads and learn what that's like. But yeah, so I love writing for both of those reasons, that you can kind of explore something you don't understand, or you can try to share something that you intimately understand. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that even and Wink is such a novel, but it has these illustrations that can either kind of emphasize the point or kind of break the tension a little bit, or just kind of make it more of a sort of an experience that you can kind of sit with a little bit longer, I think, which is really wonderful. And it's something that I think about a lot with graphic novels, because I read a lot of them,
mhm.
is what you can do in the graphic novel format to talk about really tough stuff, or have a really fun time, but still have something that is grounded in something kind of real. Um, yeah, I think there's just such a lot of possibility within the form when you include another form, or when you kind of, give the brain something else to think about, or something new to think about at the same time.
Well, and also, for reluctant readers, at least, I think it's a huge way to lure them. And like I said, Mad Magazine is what caught my eye and got me in. And I know it was the artwork as well as the writing. But then next thing you know, I was a reader, because I poured over every copy of that I could ever find, and then I moved on to other things. And I think with graphic novels, it's just such a rich way to tell a story. I think of like I don't know if you're familiar with March, the graphic novel March, and it's about Congressman John Lewis here, and anyway, it's just fantastic. And I think what they did there is this like historic document where you can get in and live it in a way that you couldn't if you just read it. So I know a lot of schools have used March in their curriculum and that sort of thing, and I completely get it, because the history kind of comes alive for you, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and just such a great way to not to use the word illustrate, but kind of to illustrate a point or an event, or something that might be completely outside of a young person's frame of reference.
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
painting a picture. Wow, I'm just really using all of the art words.
It's hard not to when you're talking about it, because that's exactly what it does. So literally and figuratively, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I am really interested. If you just mentioned March which would be great for, if not for our classrooms, but for teachers to look at for what's possible in graphic novels. Do you have are there any other particular graphic novels that you've been really impressed by, that you've really enjoyed, that you might want
I,
to name drop?
some of them are a little more, are a little bit older. There's Hey Kiddo. I don't know if you've seen that. That's a fantastic book. New Kid, that's fantastic. A friend of mine, Mark Tutuli, he's another cartoonist, and we started writing books at about the same time. And he's done some amazing. He has one called Short and Skinny. That's fantastic. Terry Liebenson is another cartoonist friend, and she does these books like Positively Emmy, and they're fantastic. And they're sort of prose mixed with graphic novel, but they've been so well received, and I think kids love them. And then I like some of the older stuff. I got in with Top Shelf Productions, and they worked with Craig Thompson and Jeff Lemire and some of these people who I just really look up to. So it was really exciting to get to do Monster on the Hill with them, who I sort of idolized. So their whole catalog is pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I can imagine just a bunch of teachers are just taking notes and going to Google right now. So thank you.
Well, the other thing I will mention, and again, if you're doing this for schools, you might need to scan it for content. I think the content it's mostly family friendly, if I'm recalling correctly. But there's a whole anthology of books called Flight, and Kazu Kibuishi, the guy who did Amulet, he edited them and put them together, and it's a bunch of little short stories. But the artwork in it, all these different artists that did these, they're just amazing and beautiful. And that's honestly, I fell in love with those anthologies and was reading those, and that's when I started making Monster, because I thought it looked so great that I wanted to try it. And some of them are 5 pages long and some are 17 pages long, but they're these gorgeous collections of shorter graphic stories, and you can't go wrong with them. I mean, they're just they're candy for your eyes to look at, but they're also really interesting. And you see the approach that all these different people take to telling a story visually.
Amazing. Thank you so much. There's another one for that list that we're building.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I have two more questions, which I try to ask to every author that we get to talk to. So I won't keep you for too much longer. But I would love to know if our teacher audience who is watching this could go back to their classroom and say, I just watched this talk with this great guy, Rob Harrell. He creates graphic novels, he illustrates, he writes, and he had one piece of advice for all of you young people for writing. What is it?
Can I do two pieces of advice?
You absolutely can.
Okay, because it's hard to pinpoint which I think is most important. But just like artwork, when I was in art school, they told us, the best way to get better is to just draw. And so they made us carry a sketchbook with us at all times, and you had to draw in it constantly. And a professor could stop you anywhere. He could stop you if he saw you walking through campus and say, let me see what you've been drawing. And you had to date your drawings and all that. And so you had to constantly be doing it. And everybody did. You'd go to a party and everybody would have their books there and be drawing in them. And I think writing is the exact same way. If you want to write. And if you want to write stories, try writing stories. Don't wait. Because I think I kind of wish I'd started writing more earlier. But it's this, and it sounds so cliche, but it's just do it, just keep writing. And then when you are doing that writing, one of the most magical things to me is if you write, let's say you write a story, you write a 3-page story, set it aside for at least 2 or 3 days. But, if you can set it aside for a week or something and then come back to it and go through it and try to make it better. Read it, because after you've set that time aside, you can read it with new eyes, and it's like you're reading it like you're the reader, and you get some distance from it, and you can see the flaws. And so I know if kids are like me, they were probably doing their homework the night before it's due and that sort of thing. But if you can give yourself time, this is more hobby writing, let's say, go back and say, here's a story I wrote a week ago. I want to see how I can make it better. What if I added something to this sentence? What if I added a character? What if I upped the tension? Or, I think that setting something aside and coming back to it is incredibly important. And I try to do that as often as I can. Like I said, I'm writing this story really fast, but I will find that, when I'm drawing it, after I've written it and then some time's gone by and I'm drawing it, I will try to rewrite it as I'm going. I'm always rewriting. So, and hopefully it's enough time goes by so that I can look at it and actually see what's there.
They are both such fantastic pieces of advice. So thank you. The power of looking at something with new eyes is kind of crazy. Like can be really transformative, but in a good way, I think. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult to go, oh no, I did that. But I think you so quickly see solutions or improvements or little ways that you can make it a little bit better.
And like we talked about, you can just tweak it. You just change a word here and there. If you feel like, oh, that doesn't quite get the point across, change the sentence, that sort of thing. And then I tend to get more descriptive in my second pass through, or I use better words, for lack of a other way to say. I need better words for that. But I'll choose words that are more evocative or something. So I think if you can keep doing that and go through it several times, it's going to be way better than it was when it spilled out of you.
Yeah, and I think there's really rich opportunities there in a classroom for grammar or vocabulary exercises, right? Like revisiting an old piece of writing and using going through and looking at the adjectives or looking at ways that we can frame things differently built on what we know from recent sort of grammar or vocabulary or spelling exercises, which is kind of really exciting in a way. You can kind of put that work back into practice.
I also think a thing that would be really interesting to do in school would be, take a 6th grader and say, find me a story that you wrote in 4th grade for school, and let's rewrite it and make it better. And I also think you got to be careful not to ever be embarrassed by what you've done in the past, because the fact that you can see where you can improve it means that you've improved in a way, or you've grown, or you've learned something that you want to bring to the project then. And so maybe you wrote some very simple story in 4th grade that in 9th grade you might be able to rewrite it and make it something really, because we're full of imagination, so the ideas are can come from wherever.
I love that. I really do. I think that's such a lovely idea. And the idea of seeing improvements in your old work means that you've improved is such a beautiful way to think about something that might for a minute make you feel a bit confronted, I suppose, or a bit,
Right.
disappointed or whatever. Yeah, it's such a lovely way to think about it.
Well, and artwork is the same way. It's almost like you're looking at, school pictures when you see your early drawings, and it's like, well, I grew up. So what are you going to do? I had a bad haircut then. What are you going to do?
Oh, I love that. I also want to really touch quickly on talking about carrying the notebook around that you did with your artwork is if you are interested in how that works in a writing setting in classrooms, we have done a webinar quite recently with Alan Wright about the concept of writers' notebooks in classrooms, where students can write in their notebook every day, but no one else has to read it, and what that can do to help establishing a writing practice, how you can encourage students to really engage in that practice. We have a whole webinar on it. I will get that link out to you.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's fantastic.
So thank you for reminding me of that. My last question is a question for advice for teachers. And I think, considering that we've been talking a bit about graphic novels and about comic strips, if you could give one piece of reading advice to teachers who are maybe picking up a graphic novel, who never have, what should they keep in mind when they're reading it? What would you advise that they use as their mindset going into it?
I think the real mindset is, I know there's been some resistance over the years to graphic novels, that like it's not real reading and that sort of thing. But I would, I think the mindset I would use is that it builds a whole other set of skills. It's not, in some ways, there's a skill there to be learned when you start reading, how to put the words and the thing together, and you got to learn to track it in different ways, and be observant, because sometimes something will be said and sometimes it's only drawn in the picture, and so you've got to pay attention to both. So I think there's a lot of benefit to reading graphic novels, if that means. And I also would say, if a kid's reading, to me, I think I would urge you to worry less about what form it's in and that sort of thing, and just the fact that they are reading and they're engaging with something, because reading Calvin and Hobbes isn't the same as reading Dostoevsky, but you are engaging with someone else's ideas and someone else's inner thoughts and their way of expressing themselves. And I think that that's really important. And so if you can build up the love of that, of connecting with someone else's creativity, the reading's going to come. Reading novels and stuff like that is going to come in time. And if it doesn't, they keep reading graphic novels, and there's plenty of them. So, and they're in all, like I said about March, it was written by a congressman, and it's all about the civil rights movement in the States here. And so you can find, and I think there's going to be more and more of that, I guess that's what I'm saying. I think graphic novels are still sort of in their early stages. I think we're going to see lots more of that. So I would just say, of course I do graphic novels, so of course I'm going to say embrace them, but I think they're really useful thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you so much. Thank you for all of this. You've given us such lovely, generous, insightful answers. And I think we've had just a really nice conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. No, I've enjoyed it. And thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun. And I wish I could come over there. I've always wanted to come down there. So maybe someday when COVID is better and all that. Yeah, maybe 10 years down the road when I've got a book that's big enough to warrant it, I'll make it down there. But yeah, It's been fun.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate it. We will see you soon with a new webinar.